All right, is everybody seeing my slides at this point? Somebody give me, Amy, you want to give me a thumbs up? Okay, great. All right, well, again, welcome everybody to this workshop today where we're going to be talking about grant seeking from a funder's perspective and what makes a proposal fundable. This is a little bit of a different approach from like normal or typical proposal writing training. Although we will talk about grant proposals to a good extent, but we're looking at, this is presenting things more from the perspective of those who receive the requests that you submit, the things that we are looking for, and some strategies that you can undertake to be successful in the process. And the three things that we're going to focus on are your organization, your project, and your proposal. And this presentation I had originally developed when Amy each year has invited me to speak to a group of Marietta College students who are in their Next Gen program, which is a program where they are working with nonprofits in the community. They serve on nonprofit boards, students serve on nonprofit boards, learn about nonprofits and nonprofit capacity building, and eventually they get to submit a request for a capacity building project for the nonprofits with whom they are working. And so I've done this presentation for a couple of years, but I did tweak it some for today. And one of the things I did is reverse a little bit the order that I talk about things. And so we'll see how that goes today. But I'm excited to present to you all today. And let me see here. Sorry, I've got to figure out how to advance my slides. Ha, there we go. Okay. So just as an overview of what we're going to touch on today, I'm going to talk briefly about my background just to give you a little bit of insight into what my experience has been both with grant proposal writing and reviewing grant proposals. Then we're going to talk about foundations in general, just a brief overview. I call it kind of Foundations 101. What are foundations all about, and how are they structured, and that sort of thing. And then I'm going to get into the heart of what makes a proposal fundable. And that's where I'm going to talk about the organization, the project, and the proposal. And then finally, I added a section just recently about COVID-19 because grant makers are changing their practices and changing their outlook related to the current situation that we're in. So I do want to touch on that because I think some of those changes might be long lasting and help grant makers think a different way about the work that they do. So I want to talk about that as well. So just a little bit about my background. As Amy mentioned, I'm currently the Associate Director for Community Leadership at the Parkersburg Area Community Foundation, which means, in short, that I oversee our leadership activities in the community and our grant-making programs. So I'm on the side of the table and have been for a number of years now, where I am looking at grant proposals that come in and helping to make decisions about what to fund and what not to fund. So I've got a lot of experience on the review process and insight into what review committees are thinking about and looking at when proposals come in. But I've also worked and volunteered as a grant seeker. One of my early jobs was a full-time job as a grant seeker for a museum in Wilmington, Delaware. So I did a lot of grant proposal writing at that time. But even since that time, occasionally I write grant proposals for the Community Foundation, but I've also helped and done some consulting over the years to help a number of organizations prepare grant proposals. So I kind of see it from both sides of the table. I know the struggles and challenges you face when you're the one putting the proposal together. And I know many of the challenges that are faced by those that are looking at those proposals when they're turned in and trying to make wise decisions. So just wanted to give you that background. And just a quick minute on the Parkersburg Area Community Foundation so that you understand the organization that I work within right now. We're a charitable foundation that builds permanent endowment funds for the region that we serve, which is an 11-county service area, 10 counties in West Virginia, and also Washington County, Ohio. So we are based in Parkersburg, which is in Wood County, West Virginia, and we serve the counties, a number of counties surrounding Wood County. And then because we are a county that borders the state of Ohio, we also do some service in Washington County, Ohio. Community foundations administer a wide variety of charitable funds. Individuals, companies, businesses come to community foundations to set up funds for causes that are important to them. And we manage those funds, and some of the funds that we manage are flexible that we use for our annual competitive grant making program. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of overview of who it is that I work for at the present time. Myra, who's on the call, is one of our other community foundations in the state of West Virginia, but there are community foundations all throughout the state of West Virginia. And if you're not connected with your local community foundation, I would encourage you to both to seek funding and as a partner, because many community foundations get engaged in convening around community issues, in nonprofit capacity building and training. So they're a great partner for you if you haven't engaged with your local community foundation. And let me pause here 1 minute to also say, if you have a question as we go along, feel free to either put it in the chat, or if you can manage to ask it, if I pause for a moment and you can manage to get it in there. I always like to try to answer, when I present in person, I like to answer questions as we go along, because I know it can be hard to hold them to the end. But if you have a question, either use a chat or try to ask it in person. And Amy and Katie, I'd ask you, if you monitor the chat, I'll be, then, give me a wave or something if you want to pose somebody's question. Okay, so that's my background. Now I want to tell you a little bit about, I told you I'd give you a little bit of Foundations 101. So I want to tell you a little bit about what is a foundation. Why do they exist? What do they do? And why are they important to you as a nonprofit? So a foundation is a nonprofit organization, just like your nonprofit organization. I'm assuming that most of your nonprofit organizations that you work with, if not all of them, are what we call 501c3 public charities. That is a designation by the IRS that essentially means that you serve a public charity purpose, and that those who make gifts to your entity can take tax deductions for those gifts. Foundations are 501c3 organizations as well. Some of them might be classified as public charities, and some of it's private foundations. I won't get into the difference there because it doesn't matter that much from your perspective, but we're nonprofit organizations just like you. But our mission is different. Most of your mission is to provide certain services, to respond to certain needs, to have certain initiatives. Foundations exist to give money away in the form of grants. That's the purpose of a foundation, is to give money away. And in fact, private foundations, I mentioned there are some differences in foundations, but private foundations are required by law to give away a certain percentage of their assets every year. So they must give their money away. So that is really part of the essential mission. And so foundations are nonprofit organizations. They exist to give money away in the form of grants, and they support other charitable organizations and purposes. So those grants that foundations make have to be made for charitable purposes. So foundations are here to support all the things that you all are doing to meet the needs of the communities that you are serving. So I always like to talk about, when I talk about foundations, I always like to give this little bit of a speech, I guess, at the beginning. And let me frame it by saying, and this number might be a little bit even out of date because I didn't look up the very most recent numbers, but there are more than 80,000 foundations in the United States. And that sounds like a lot of opportunity. That's why I always have my pot of gold here, because it sounds like, wow, there's this big pot of gold out there. But I always have a but about that, a but, and I'll get to the but in a minute. And I don't know if Amy, you were able to do my poll. So we've got a little way for you all to interact here. I have a little poll for you all to answer. The question is, what percentage of all charitable donations that are made in the United States each year come from foundations versus individuals or corporations? So let me see your guess. What percentage comes from foundations versus individuals and or corporations? I'll give it a sec. I can see the numbers moving. Everybody can see those results, right? Okay, I don't see the numbers moving anymore. So it looks like we have some diverse answers here. The top, which shows the top answer. Look at that, Amy just must have just done that. So
I'm sorry, I don't see the results.
You don't see the results? Do others see it, or maybe I'm the only one who sees the results? Well, I'll announce it.
I got it.
Okay, you got it? Everybody got
well,
it? Okay.
It was there. There it is again. Okay.
Okay. So the top answer, although the answers are pretty split, but the top answer is 30 to 40%. If you add that to the one above, about half of you think 30% or more, and I'd say, and half of you think 30% or less. So let's, we'll close that poll. I don't know if I can close it. I guess I can. Yeah, okay. So let's see what the answer is here. So Giving USA every year does a study of charitable giving in the United States. I've got numbers here from 2018, which I think are the latest numbers. They report that in 2018, 77% of the $427 billion in charitable gifts made in the United States from individuals. Foundations gave 18%. So remember, we had half of you thought 50% or 30% or more, right? Half thought less than 30%. So the half of you that were in that less than 30% category were closer to that number. So 18%, corporations 5%. So again, individuals 77%, and that includes bequests. So gifts from living individuals, and bequests would be gifts through individual wills and estates. So 77% from individuals, 18% from foundations, 5% from corporations. So if you are a fundraiser for a nonprofit organization and you see those numbers, what would you think about how you should allocate your time? And I'll let anybody who wants to answer, go ahead and answer.
Well, undoubtedly, on individuals.
Bequests.
Go ahead, is somebody else?
I was just going to say bequests. Look for ways to promote your organization so that people will give to you after they die.
Yeah.
And I share this because most nonprofits, when they have a project they want to implement or have a new need that they're trying to address, one of their first thoughts is we need to get a grant. We need to get a grant to do this. Or they might think about a special event, which is certainly trickier in these days to raise dollars. But I think that, you have to think about where the charitable gifts come from, and you need to have, as a nonprofit, you need to have a robust individual giving program, and probably put more of your time into that than into securing grants from foundations or contributions from corporations. So that's just kind of my one, always cautionary note when I start talking about grants in general. But that being said, foundations awarded $75 billion in grants in 2018, $75 billion. And that's all across the country, of course. That's a lot of money. So I had my pot of gold on the last slide, and here's my big stack of money. So there is there are opportunities out there. And as a nonprofit, you definitely want to be seeking those opportunities and positioning yourself as strongly as you can to be successful in that, in pursuing those opportunities. So when you think about foundations, and you've got that $75 billion out there given in the United States, but every foundation has its own interests and priorities, and that's really important to know when you're approaching a funder. And I think the three key things for you to know about a foundation or to learn about a foundation are whether the foundation has a particular geographic focus, what fields of interest it typically likes to support, and what project types it will or will not support. So I think geographic focus is the most important. So when I mentioned there are 80,000 foundations in the United States and they gave away $75 billion, most foundations have limited geographic focus. So they might focus on West Virginia, or they might focus on Hinton, West Virginia, or they might focus on New York City, or they might focus on the Southwest. So you need, that's, when I look at, like when I'm a grant seeker and I'm looking at a potential foundation for support, it's geographic areas of focus are the key thing, because even if there's a foundation out there, say you're an arts organization that does community art work, if there might be a foundation that funds a lot of that kind of work, very similar to what you want to do, but it's not interested in your geographic area. That's not a good fit for you to pursue for funding. So geographic focus is super important. Fields of interest are very important. Some foundations are very broad. You'll find that community foundations in general tend to be pretty broad in supporting projects in a variety of fields of interest, but many foundations are more focused and narrow than that. I'll give a local example in the Mid-Ohio Valley. The Sisters Health Foundation, which is a foundation that was created out of the sale of a former hospital in our community. Their focus is on all things around health and community wellness. So, they may think that education is really important and the arts are really important, but that's not what their foundation, that's not the priority of their foundation. So you have to be sure that the project that you are working on aligns with the foundation's interests, because otherwise it'll be very, very difficult to have success. And then the last thing that I mentioned was project types. And by that, I mean that some foundations will put limitations on the types of projects that they would support. For example, some foundations will support capital projects like construction projects or the purchase of large equipment. Many won't. Some foundations might provide operating support grants. And by that, I mean support for the general operations of your organization, but some won't. Some might do new program development. Some might do capacity building. Some might not. So the geographic focus, the fields of interest, and the project types are really important for you to be aware of when looking at foundations. So that was kind of my Foundations 101 very quickly. And if I look to the side at all, I'm also watching my watch so that I make sure that I move through all the material. But I'll pause for a minute in case anybody has any questions before I move to the next section. Okay, hearing none, I'm going to start now moving into kind of this, now that I've told you about foundations, I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about how foundations think when they receive proposals. And this is where we're going to talk first about the organization, the second about the project, and the third about the proposal. And this is where I switched things up a little bit about this presentation. I used to talk, the order I used to talk about it in was the proposal, the project, the organization. And as I thought about this presentation today, I thought really, well, no, really, it starts first with the organization, because foundations want to support strong organizations. And that's why many foundations want to get to know your organization in a more in-depth way. And also why when you submit grant proposals, foundations ask for things like your operating budget, or your financial statements, or your list of board members, or other documents like that, because they are wanting to understand your organization and the strength of your organization. And I'm going to focus in this section on the primary things that I know that I look for, and that I think that foundations in general look for what connected to a grant proposal. And so in terms of your organization, I think that one of the things that foundations look at is the strength of the board. They want to know that your organization is well managed by its board. Can they tell all of this from a grant application? Probably not, but a lot of foundations, especially if they're local or regional, will get to know your organization and get to know how you're structured. And if they see any concerns in these areas, that might cause them to have pause about supporting your organization with a grant. So what things specifically are foundations looking for? A solid board structure, that your board has diversity in skills and backgrounds and expertise of those who serve on your board, that your board represents your community and the people that you're trying to serve, and that you have term limits and conflict of interest policies. Again, will they know all this from a grant application? Not necessarily, but they're going to get to know your organization. And these are things that you really need to have in place to be a strong organization and to be well positioned for seeking grants. Term limits, I think, are one of the challenging things for nonprofits, especially in rural communities, at least that I hear, that, you know, folks are concerned that there are limited people who are willing to serve, and when you get good board members, you don't want to have term limits. But I would advocate that term limits are always the best practice, because we want to make sure that we have new voices coming onto our boards, and that, you know, we have that chance to think more broadly about who might be able to serve. And you can always have, you know, an advisory committee or some other way to engage those who you don't want to lose their involvement, or have a period of time that they have to sit off and can then return to the board. But I pause on that one for a minute because I know that one can be kind of challenging. But so foundations want to see a solid board structure, and they want to know that your board members are actively participating, that you have regularly scheduled board meetings, that they're well attended, that your board is contributing financially to your organization. That's always important, because you want, before you ask others, even if it's asking foundations for support, one of the strongest ways to position yourself for that is to say our board members are all supporting our organization, and we would like you to do so as well. And foundations want to see that your board is engaged in planning and oversight. And you know, sometimes foundations will want to come to site visits to your organization, and if you can engage board members and show that you have active board members, they are aware of and involved in your projects, and they're actively engaged, you know, I would definitely encourage you to involve board members in those kinds of efforts, so that that foundation can see that you really have a strong and solid board.
Marion, we have a question.
Sure.
Is there a magic number of board members?
There are a magic number of board members. Not really, but you know, I'm going to do some red flags here in a minute. And the one red flag I'll give is too few board members. Too few board members makes me uneasy sometimes as a grant maker. And by too few, I usually mean 5 or less. And there could be some circumstances where 5 is adequate. But when I see 5 or less, I start to wonder about the how, you know, engaged that organization is in the community, how much oversight there is from that board. I'd be particularly concerned, and I've seen this, when you have 5 or fewer board members and 2 or 3 of them have the same last name or live on the same street, because sometimes we'll get board lists where they actually list the addresses and things for board. So to me, that seems like a very insular board, and it's not, you know, it's just a few people who are maybe personally connected to each other, and it's not broadly representative of the community. I think when you get to, I think there is a challenge with boards being too large too. You know, when you get above 20, 25, then I think you're going to spend a lot of time as a nonprofit leader managing those board members. These are just my personal opinions, and you know, Amy or others might have ones that differ, but too small is, I think, can raise questions from a foundation standpoint. I think too large makes management questions difficult on your end. Other questions? Good question.
Myra, was your question for the group? I felt like maybe that was a chat, or would you like to pose it to Marion?
Yeah, I would pose it out loud. So yeah, thank you.
So how do folks encourage more board members' financial support for the foundation when it's been optional before 2015-16?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, one of the pieces of advice that I have on that is to have a board policy around that, an expectation, a written expectation around that. You know, you should have a board member job description. Again, Amy can help me. I'm getting into a lot of just general nonprofit capacity building here, so she may have other suggestions, but if you have written expectations that include the expectation that a board member will contribute financially at whatever means, there, you know, some nonprofits go so far as to put in a minimum amount, but I don't think that is critical. I don't think the amount is critical. I think that the commitment is critical. And that can be a hard transition if that has not been an expectation on a board. But I think you have to have a conversation with your board and adopt that as a policy. And then as you onboard new board members, that's clearly articulated up front so that then they know that's an expectation, and that when they're agreeing to serve on the board, they're agreeing to that expectation. Amy, do you have anything you'd add to that?
No, I would just be clear with the board that it's not the amount, it's the percentage.
Right. You want 100% board participation regardless of what the amount is.
Right.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to keep moving because I know I've got a lot to go through. So the board, but your board is very important, and foundations want to know that you have a strong board. And the last point I had about that was, you know, strong board engagement in governments, that your board members understand the organization's finances, that they're evaluating and overseeing the executive staff, and that they're engaged in planning. And again, you know, if you're ever in front of a foundation and you have a board member there and questions start coming up about finances, you want to be sure that your board is educated and informed, because if not, that will be a red flag to a funder. And that starts me to my red flags, which I already mentioned a couple of these. So I'll try to move through some of these quicker, but boards that are too small, I mentioned that's a red flag for me. I think fewer than 5 members raises questions. Boards with several members from the same family or people who live on the same street. I already mentioned that. And these are real. I have seen this. I'm not just making this up. I've seen this when I've seen grant applications, and I think, oh, I don't know, you know, about the strength of that board and the connection with the community. On boards that appear just generally weak in terms of expertise or clout, you know, one of the things you should be thinking about with your board is what kind of expertise do we need to be successful as an organization, and foundations like to see, you know, that kind of expertise is on your board. Again, I already talked about this, boards without term limits. So the kind of the reverse of that is when you see that a board has been the same people for a long period of time, that can raise questions to me as a funder. And, you know, those funders like me, you know, who have been with a foundation for a long time will see those boards lists over time and realize it's the same people and start to wonder about the vitality of that organization. Other red flags, again, I may have mentioned some of these boards. If your boards aren't holding regular meetings or having trouble getting quorum, or, you know, high board turnover. And again, all this might not be visible right on the grant application, but foundations and funders, especially in their local community, they hear this and know this. So sometimes it's in the newspaper, or sometimes they just hear it or know it. And so those kinds of things definitely cause concern among funders. Questions about the board? Anything else? So the other really important piece, and a lot of this will be very visible in a grant application, is that foundations are going to look at the organization's finances. And that's why they ask you to submit your audited financial statements or your 990 tax return or your operating budget or whatever financial information that you have. So, you know, foundations are looking, you know, to see, does the organization have a balanced operating budget? And do they have specific projections for income and expenditures? In other words, have they thought out their budget? They know what their budget is. And is it, you know, is it balanced, or are they running big deficits, or, you know, what is their situation in that regard? They want to know that organizations, that boards are regularly looking at the financial statements of the organization. And if the organization has an audit, foundations want to see that it's clean. And by clean, that means that there are, you know, no statements by the auditor about, no qualified statements about from the auditor. I don't know if any of your organizations have ever gotten qualified statements. One that I see that makes me, the one that I see that makes me the most concerned is when the auditor will say there's a going concern about the organization. That term, going concern, means that they are concerned that the organization may not survive, may not continue. And I have seen, a few audits submitted where that going concern, sometimes we can understand that in all that, but a going concern is always a big red flag. So foundations want to see that organizations are operating in the black, not the red. Although we know, that there are, sometimes it's just a point in time picture that may look like it's in the red, but there are reasons for that. But we want to see that the organization is stable financially, and that you have some reserves. Reserves are not bad. Reserves are good, and that's can be. Sometimes I think organizations wonder, well, if we've accumulated some reserves, is that going to hurt us? But it really shouldn't hurt you. Funders should look at that as positive, especially in these days. Organizations need to have some reserves on hand to be viable, whether that's cash reserves, some kind of endowment or investments or whatever it is. And I think foundations want to see that expenditures for administration versus program costs are reasonable. And we could get into a whole lot of debate, and we don't have time for that today, about overhead. And I think that foundations are coming around to understanding that overhead is part of your ability to deliver services. But I also don't think that foundations want to see that too out of line in terms of admin versus program expenses. Red flags for foundations with finances, operating deficits, especially if they're big and especially if they're ongoing. And a lot of the 990s, a lot of times it'll show at least 2 years. You can see over 2 years. Audits might show 2 or 3 years depending on the audit. So operating deficits are always concerning. Large liabilities can be concerning. So in your financial statements, you can always see the organization's liabilities. If you have debt or owed money from other entities, that can be concerning, especially if liabilities exceed your assets. Again, audits that have an adverse opinion from the auditor. Administrative expenses that seem too high. If the organization's financial position looks so dire that you question the future of the organization, that's a big concern. And I think sometimes nonprofits want to show that they have need for support, but you don't want your needs to look so profound that you kind of look like a sinking ship, because no funder wants to put funding into a sinking ship. And then lastly, failure to submit your tax return. So all nonprofits, you all probably know, are required to submit a tax return every year. Some of them, if they're small and don't get much revenue, it's just a little postcard thing. But I still find nonprofits who apply to us for grants who have their tax exempt status revoked for failure to submit their tax returns for 3 years in a row. I just found one again the other day. So you all are probably not in that situation, but maybe you are on boards of some. Make sure they're submitting their tax return every year.
We have a question. Mm-hmm. Is there an ideal percentage for administration?
I don't think so. I think that's because that can vary so much on the type of organization. And I always think that's tricky because different organizations classify admin costs in different ways. So I don't have a good answer on that. But, I think you just want to make the case that the majority of your funds are going towards services. And you might have to make the case that those admin costs are really necessary and critical in order to be able to provide those services as well. And again, I think funders are coming around about that. Okay, to wrap up this section, in terms of, so your organization, you want to have a strong board, strong financial position. But the other things that you want to collect as an organization to be ready for grant seeking and to have things at your hands. I have a kind of a list here. I'll just run through them real quickly. if you have these things ready, when a grant proposal comes up, you can plop them in and you're, at least have these portions of things done. Your mission statement, they're all going to ask you to describe your services and your programs. You should have a ready and handy list of your officers and board members. You should have your 501c3 letter handy, and some kind of financial statements, whether it's an audit, your tax return, just your year-end financial statements, even if they're not audited, and sometimes they even want your operating budget. So have those things handy and ready so that when it comes time to submit a grant request, you just can pop those right in. Okay. Let me pause again before I end that section for questions about the organization. Okay, so we talked about having a strong organization, and I think the next thing that I'm going to talk about, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is the project, because I think everybody, when they think about applying for a grant, they start thinking about the proposal first, but it's really about the project. A strong grant proposal starts with a strong project. So it's about the project, not just the proposal. You have to write a good proposal, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But a good proposal starts with a good project. And that's really the key, I think. So I want to talk about successful projects. What are the things that funders look for to say that, oh, this looks like it could be a successful project? So they want to know that the project addresses an important and a documented need in the community. And when I talk about need, I'm talking about the community's need, not the organization's need. A lot of times when organizations submit grant proposals, they talk about their own needs. We need a staff person to do outreach. We need a new facility. We need whatever it might be. And what I encourage you to think about is the community's need. What need are you trying to meet in the community? So you might need an outreach staff member because there are children in the community who need who need an advocate in the school system to help them meet special needs. So you need an outreach coordinator to work with those children. But the need you're talking about is the need of those children, not the need of your organization to have a new staff person. So focus on the community need and that it's an important and a documented community need. I'll come back to this in a minute. Foundations want to see proposals that are well thought out, well conceived, and well planned, and that are evidence-based. That's a term that some of you may have heard of, but that, if you're trying to start something new, a foundation is going to want to know that there's some evidence out there that this approach can be successful. And that might be that another organization has implemented something similar, or there's some research out there that you can base this on. So evidence-based is really important. And I'll just give an example on that. With our foundation is particularly interested in substance use disorders and how we can help address those issues in our community. And I sometimes encounter individuals who want to start new substance use disorder treatment programs. And in those cases, especially, I want to know about evidence-based. Sometimes people have a heart and a passion for a cause, and I value that greatly. But you need to have some evidence that the approach that you plan to take is going to be successful. And when somebody wants to come up with a brand new approach that's different, I always have a little bit of caution of wanting to know, okay, what's the evidence or the research that shows that you're going to be successful. Foundations also want to see projects that are collaborative and that don't duplicate other services that are already offered. A lot of foundations, especially if they're local or regional, will know about other services offered in the community. And if they know about something else that's being done that's very similar to what you want to do, they're going to ask you, well, what about, could you partner with this other agency? Or have you looked into how your work would complement or relate to the work that they're doing? That's really key. Successful projects demonstrate how they will impact the community served. I kind of talked about that in terms of looking at community need. Have clear implementation and evaluation plans, and a well thought out and researched budget. And we'll come back to that later because that's really important. So as over the years, as you know, I've worked with review committees and looked at proposals. I kind of came up with this list of things that might raise questions about projects that organizations propose for grant funding. And the first one, I have to give credit to one of our grants committee members, who's now our board chair, but when she was on our grants committee, she would always talk about wants versus needs. Is it something that this organization wants, or is this something that the community needs? And that's different. There are a lot of things that we want, but what are the true needs? And I think that's a question we ask ourselves a lot at our foundation. Is it a want or is it a need? Projects that are just vague and not specific, kind of broad ideas that don't seem concrete, I think can be raise red flags. If it looks like there's a lack of planning, that it was a project that was just thrown together and there's not been a lack of planning, or there's not been that research base to understand the evidence that this might work. I mentioned if it duplicates a service already offered, that's going to raise a question. If the project seems unrealistic, just in terms of whether it could actually be completed as the organization is thinking about, is it too big? Is it too complex? Do they need to bite off one piece of it first before they try to take on this bigger project? Oh, okay. So let's talk a little bit about documenting need. I said I'd return to that. And I think this is one of the most important things about projects, and that's why I'm emphasizing it. And I think Amy's got another poll for you. So what is the best way to document need for a project or program? And you've got several choices there. So let's hear your thought. What is the best way to document need for a project or program? Y'all want to put your answer in? I think it looks like the bars aren't moving anymore. So our top answer was use statistics. And then we had about equal on use survey results, share personal stories and testimony, and cite similar programs that have been successful. This was a trick question, and I didn't give you this option, but the answer is all of those. All of those can help you document need. You can certainly use statistics, and that is very important, whether it's census data or data that's available in your community, or whatever statistics that you have that can document the need in your community, very important. You might have survey results. Maybe it's surveys that you've conducted as an organization, or community surveys or national surveys, whatever it might be. That can help you document need. Powerfully, I think stories and testimony are really powerful. And I think that a lot of grant seekers don't think about sharing the stories. They share the statistics, they share the survey results, they might quote authorities we mentioned there, or cite other successful programs, similar programs. They don't always share the stories. And I think you have to remember that foundations are made up of people. They're people just like you, and they want to hear those stories. And so if you can contextualize your statistics and your surveys and share a story of a person, an individual who has the need that you're trying to address, or maybe that was helped through one of your services, and understanding that in some cases you may not be able to share the person's name and you have to respect confidentiality, certainly. But share those stories. I think that can be one of the best ways to document need. But these are all important ways. No one way is necessarily better than the other. So I was tricking you a little bit there, but I wanted you to think about all the ways. And so I have a little group exercise, and I'm watching my time. As usual, I take longer than I think. I was going to put you into breakout rooms for this, but Amy, I think I'm not going to do that because I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time if I do that. So, but I did want to have a little bit of discussion, and we'll just do it as a large group here, to just kind of delve into this. If you were documenting the need for a project, I'm going to give you here, it's a project idea, and just a few of you pitch in and say, how would you document the need? So imagine that the project that you want to submit a grant request for is to renovate or expand a kitchen at a senior center so that you can serve more seniors. How would you document that need? Anybody?
Well, I guess I would first find out how many seniors we want to feed, how many seniors there are that we
You
could
would
possibly.
first probably want to show that there are more seniors in the community that need the service.
Yes, I was hearing two of you at once, but I think that's about the same kind of answer. How many seniors need this? What are the numbers? How many seniors in the community need that service? Yes. What else might you be able to document, use to document the need?
One thought I have is that maybe you want to document that you're not duplicating services, that other people are, you know, that there's no other way to go about doing this, that you are either one of a few or the only service in the area that's serving your community.
Yes, I agree. Yes, excellent. Yeah, that you're not duplicating, that you're the only service. Yes.
This is Ayla. I would also do a survey of your current people who are being fed and see what their response is and how important it is to them. You know, do a survey that gives that kind of feedback. Also, maybe do an actual story of a resident that your facilities were really important, and then document the number of people you've already served and the number that you want to serve that you need expanded facilities for. The other thing is, I'm thinking this project, one of the things, depending on the project itself, they might want to have some of those seniors actually cooking, in which case that would justify expanding your facility.
Yeah, excellent. I want to stop there just because I am looking at the time, but those are all excellent. That is exactly, you want to look at all those statistics, surveys, personal testimony. If they have a waiting list, you'd want to document that. And, you know, there might even be some ways to document or provide research or background on, you know, nutritional needs of seniors and challenges that seniors have to access food. And also the social aspect of it too, because a lot of those, if they're congregate meal programs, there's a real social aspect. Or if it's home, if they also do home delivery, there's certainly a contact and social aspect there as well. Okay, so we've talked about the organization. We've talked about the project. Now, finally, we're going to get to the proposal, which is sometimes, like, again, I think what people think about as at first before they think through the other things. But some important tips about your proposal. And this kind of circles back to Foundations 101, because really the important first step is to match your organization and the project's interests and needs with the interests and needs of the grant-making organization. So again, back to where I talked about, foundations have a geographic focus, they have field of interest focus, they have types of projects that they support. You need to find the foundations that match up with what it is that you're trying to do. And how do you do that? You've got to do your homework. So any foundation that you want to approach, you've got to gather and review information about that funder. Most foundations have websites these days that enable you to, you know, go and learn about the foundation, look at past grants made, look at their grant making guidelines. You might have a local library that has foundation center resources where you can learn about foundations, but you want to do your homework, understand the funder's priorities, their grant making history, their application procedures and requirements. And then you want to find that bullseye, right? So you're researching, you're fitting all the pieces of the puzzle together, and you're finding that bullseye between here's the need in our community, the project that we want to do, and the funder's interests. They all align. Is there a question there? Because I thought maybe we had a chat. No? Okay.
One thing I've learned is that every grantor, every foundation generally has a point person that you can talk to that is a wealth of information about, if you just kind of run your project, they can give you a lot of guidance in terms of how to make it more of a fit.
Yes, absolutely. If you can make personal contact with the funder before submitting the application, that always improves your chances, because they're going to give you advice, they're going to give you tips, they're going to help you shape your request. You definitely want to try to engage if you can. And most of us are ready and willing to do that. That's what our job is, right? So what makes a proposal successful? Some key things. You want to provide a clear and thorough explanation of your project. You don't want, after the reviewer has read your proposal, you don't want them to have a lot of questions in their mind. You should try to anticipate and answer questions that a reviewer might have. Of course, you need to document the need. We've just talked about that pretty thoroughly. I haven't had a whole lot of time to talk about it, and we won't get into details of this today, but you want to have a clear implementation plan. What's your work plan? And then how are you going to evaluate your project? And we could do a whole workshop just on that, but not today. You want to ask for a specific and realistic amount of support. So when I say realistic, when you're doing your homework about the funder, you want to see what is the range of typical grants that they make. What's their average grant? You want to learn that so that you're asking for something that fits in that range. Here at the Community Foundation, our grants range from $1,000 to $15,000, with our average grant still being in the kind of the $6,000 to $7,000 range. So occasionally, we will still get requests for $20,000 or $50,000 even. That raises red flags, because what that says to me as a funder is that organization did not do their homework. They don't understand who we are as a foundation and what our capacity is. That doesn't mean you can't have a $50,000 project and come to our foundation for a piece of it, as long as you have the other pieces kind of outlined. But to ask us for $50,000 is not a realistic request, maybe for another foundation. So be specific. How much do you need? Be realistic. Explain clearly how those funds will be used. Keep your proposal clean of grammatical errors and typos. I'm reviewing a little group of proposals right now, and several of them are full of typos. Our online application doesn't have a specific spell check, so I always encourage people to create their little drafts of their narratives in Word and spell check them and then plug them in. But those grammatical and type errors and typos do cause concern. And of course, have a well-prepared budget, which I am going to get back to here in a minute. So things that might raise questions among a funder about the proposal. If you don't answer certain questions or leave out part of the application, that's a little harder these days now that most funders are online and most of them require answers to questions, so you can't finish without answering, but you can still be too brief. I find that a lot in our proposal. We try to keep our grant proposal pretty simple because we don't want organizations to have to spend a tremendous amount of time to ask for $5,000, for example. But you can be too brief. In our application, when organizations just put a sentence or two to answer, like maybe we have 3 major questions and they're just giving us a sentence or two each question, that just doesn't give the reviewers enough information to feel good about funding that request. So you can be too brief. It's harder to be too lengthy these days because usually you have word limits or character limits and that sort of thing. But you do want to be cautious of, like, when you don't want to go on to an extent that it takes too long to get to the main point, right? You don't want to lose your reviewer by throwing in too much detail that distracts from exactly what you're asking for. Of course, if you request support for something that a foundation doesn't typically fund, that's going to be problematic, but if you do your homework well, you shouldn't be in that position. Failure to provide a detailed and well-researched budget, or the budget is inflated or is inaccurate. Budgets are key, folks. Budgets are key, and I'm going to show you a couple budget examples here in a minute, but I know our review committee, their biggest concerns usually come about related to the budget. And we have people on our review committee who are really review. And if you have a piece of equipment or something in there and you throw a number in there about how much that's going to cost, they'll get online and they'll Google it. So, and they'll say, well, why do they need this? It's, that's way more expensive than I've seen. And so you really want to have that well-researched, and you don't want to have questions come up about your budget. Other things that could raise questions, if you have a really large project and you don't have a clear plan for raising the rest of the funds, especially if you're asking a foundation for a piece of it, they're going to want to see that you have a good plan to get the rest. I mentioned this already, if you ask for more than the funder can provide, or if it's messy with typos and type grammatical errors and such. Okay, let's talk budgets. I promised you I'd talk budgets, and I'm gonna do this, and I am watching my time. So I'm gonna show you two budgets here. I'm gonna put one up on the screen, and you all look at it. Take a minute or two to look at it. This one is an adaptation of a grant request I got a long time ago. So none of you have to worry that this was yours, but so look at this budget. This is very close to what was submitted with a grant request once that I received. Now I'm going to show you number two. This is an actual budget, and this is an actual 4-H camp, and I have their permission to use this. So I'm going to go, I don't know how I go back actually now. No, it's not going to let me go back. Oh, and I'm just going forward. Well, Amy, do you know how I go back? Shoot. You guys remember those budgets? I'm going to stop sharing my screen a minute so we can actually talk. Then I can go back. Tell me what you thought about those two budgets. Which one was?
Well, the second one had lots of detail.
Right.
They costed out every single thing that they were going to buy.
And they had all the funding except for the grant request amount.
Right, the first
Yes.
one had $10,000 in income and $138,000 worth of expenses. So if they were asking for a part of that budget, maybe it would work, like the sewer line or whatever it was, sewer water, maybe then it would have worked, but because they were asking $10,000 towards $138,000, was kind of not quite right. Or they were asking, more to the point, they were asking for $128,000 to $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And now I'm not sure how to get back to that bigger view too, Amy.
I want to point out, I do grant reviewing too sometimes. I want to point out something that I dislike about this kind of budget. Those numbers are way too round. Somebody didn't actually go get quotes and really work through what those things are going to cost.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You're all saying good things. I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted trying to get to the right place, but you're all saying good things. Okay, yeah. So round numbers, very broad, not specific, right? How, if you were a funder, and everybody can show thumbs up or thumbs down, would you feel thumbs up or thumbs down about this budget?
Thumbs down.
Right, thumbs down.
Most grants that I've done also ask for a narrative, which outlines then, the narrative budget outlines what each of those categories includes.
Right.
So it might be two pieces of the budget.
Right, if there was a well-detailed narrative that went with that, then it might be better. Yes, yeah. How about this one? So you already mentioned a little bit about this one. How do you feel about this one?
Yeah, this one's good. Very detailed.
Well, the figures match, that helps. You know, it's within reason, and it's again, like Amy was saying, it's not all round numbers. It's obviously information that's been costed out. And yeah, so.
It looks like they've done some fundraising and now they're looking to complete the project with their request of you. And so you realize as a foundation, you can really make a difference. You can make this project happen.
Yes, yes, all the above. And this was something that we funded. So that's when I ask somebody to share something and it's something we funded, they're usually pretty willing. So yeah, it's very detailed. It's very specific. They went down to, the number of screws and the number of, how much gravel they needed. And, it's very detailed. And you feel like when you look at this, you feel like they have researched this and they know, what it's going to cost. As I think it was Shalene who was talking, who mentioned, they've already, done some of their own fundraising and they're putting, some work into that end too. And it makes, a funder feel good that some funds have already been committed and they just need the remainder of it to make it happen. So budgets really, really are important. And these are just two simple examples. But the more detailed that you can be, and most funders want to see not just the expenses, but also the income. Okay, so you have these expenses, where's the income coming from? You want to make sure your numbers add up. I've seen plenty of budgets where the numbers don't add up, and that raises red flags. And that everything's lined up. Like what I think I like about this, what I'm showing you here, everything's like lined up. Sometimes I get like budgets where the numbers aren't lined up, and then it's really hard to read. They're hard to read. Budgets are really important. Anybody have any other thoughts about these two budgets before I move on?
Does the percentage of the requests that will be funded by the organization, does that matter? Like I noticed that like 5,000 of the project is being funded by the grant, and that's a larger percentage of the project. Does that play into it at all?
It can. I mean, that would differ by foundations. You know, some foundations don't want to be the only partner, so they want to just take a piece of it. Some are okay taking the whole of it. So you really have to understand the foundation. But I think most like to see that there's some other community commitment toward the project, whether that's cash or in kind. And by in kind, I mean the donation of like labor or services or goods. So I think you come at it a much stronger position if you can show that you already have some commitment, whatever level that may be. So yeah, I don't know if that's a clear answer, but I think you're stronger if you have some commitment. On the flip side of that is like what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Somebody has to go first, right? So somebody has to be the first one to commit. Okay. All right, well, I have a few minutes to just kind of address a little bit about COVID-19, and then I'll try to leave at least 2 or 3 minutes at the end. I think I can get through this COVID stuff fairly quickly, but I think you're seeing I hope you're seeing a lot of change among grant makers right now based on the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that grant makers are being more flexible, they're partnering even more, and they're simplifying. And I'll just mention a few things quickly. So in terms of flexibility, I think funders, if you have an existing grant that you are now having challenges implementing because of the current situation, reach out to your funder. You may find that they are very flexible right now in allowing you to make changes, to extend deadlines, to repurpose. I know we've done that. I know other local funders have done that. And kind of related to that, I think funders are, open to the idea of that organizations need general operating support right now. So flexibility, I think, is really being welcome, really being practiced right now. Funders are partnering. Funders partner often, but those partnerships, I think, are getting deeper and even more rooted right now in the pandemic. Joining together to fund things, communicating with each other what they're funding so that they don't duplicate. I think, in local and regional areas especially, you're seeing a lot of that deep partnership and communication and coordination. And for those of, there are a number of us that are doing grants related to COVID relief. And I think for the most part, we're trying to keep to simple application processes, quicker response times, and then more flexibility or more time in terms of reporting. And I mention all these because I think it'll be interesting for funders. If we can do this during a pandemic, why can't we do this more regularly? Maybe we need to be doing more of this always. We'll see how much of this sticks. But I really think there's a lot of what I'm calling trust-based philanthropy going on right now. We trust the organizations that are on the ground doing the work to do the work, and we know that they need funds to do it. And I think that hopefully that philosophy of trust-based philanthropy will continue beyond the pandemic. In the short term, I do think a lot of funders are focusing on meeting, helping to meet basic needs in the community and among residents, food assistance, financial hardship, those kinds of things. I think some funders are providing technical assistance for things like nonprofits to pursue federal funding, like the Paycheck Protection Program and such. I think in the longer term, and I think the longer term is kind of starting to start already. I think funders are concerned about nonprofit continuity and sustainability. I think they're going to be concerned about that for a while. So if you have needs related to, your own capacity and sustainability, funders might be, more open now than ever to hear about those needs and to support them. I think we're all trying to adjust to the new normal. And capacity building is an annual like this, but I mean, I think we've seen that nonprofits that have built their capacity in recent years have been in a better position to pivot and adapt than those who have not. So I think that we're going to see an ongoing focus on capacity building. So I think important lessons in COVID-19 and really now and always in terms of relationships between funders and grant seekers is that listening on both sides. Funders need to listen, the grant seekers need to listen, so that we're all open and listening to each other's perspectives and really paying close attention to that. I think trust is important. It's all about relationships, folks. And you've got to build relationships with funders. You've got to build that trust. And one of the ways that you build that trust is to be accountable. Everybody needs to be accountable to each other. It's not just the grantees being accountable to the funders, but it's the funders being accountable to the nonprofit community as well. It has to go both ways. So listening, trust, and accountability, I think, are the important lessons. And build your capacity. That's what's going to make you stronger in seeking grants in general. It's going to make you stronger when we face challenges like COVID-19. So build your board, build your staff, pay attention to your finances, work on planning. That's all about building your capacity. All right, now I'm on my last slide, and I see I have like 2 minutes left. So just my final tips. I think I've mentioned all these. Develop a good project. Talked about that. Do your homework. Talked about that. Tell your story. You really are telling a story. Don't be afraid to tell your stories in your grant proposal and to your funders and in your final reports and in your communication with your funders. Tell the stories. They want to hear the stories. If you give them good stories, they'll put them in their annual reports and post them on their social media and share your stories. Don't make assumptions when you're applying for grants. Don't assume that they know your organization. Don't assume that they know what you're talking about. Even if you've applied to that foundation 10 times, there are going to be different people on that review committee all the time. Don't assume. And one way to help you with that is use an outside reader. Before you submit a grant proposal, have somebody read it who hasn't helped with a proposal or maybe even that doesn't know anything about your organization. They're going to see the red flags. They're going to raise the questions that you need to rethink, and they're going to notice those typos and grammatical errors too, and they're going to help you clean it up.
As all question for you, Marian.
Yes.
Tell the story. So I'm finding in a lot of grant applications that are online that there's really not enough space to tell the story. I mean, they give you 2,000 characters, which may seem like a lot, but when you're trying to explain the project, there's really no room for a story. I've had to cut so much out. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
That's a challenge, Shalene. That is true. And we're probably a little guilty of that at the Community Foundation because we have our word limits. And although one time somebody told me that they were really struggling with our word limits, and I think I did in the next cycle expand our word limits some. So I mean, you could give that feedback.
That has happened once with our Community Foundation. I did mention that and they did expand it. So that was great. But not everybody's as accommodating.
Yeah, because I mean, don't be afraid to give the feedback. They might not change, but at least, let them know that it's challenging and could they consider a little bit of a larger word count or character count. It is challenging. So, but as much as you can, I try to squeeze those in. And sometimes those may be even more important than some other things, even if it's a 2 or 3 sentence story.
If they have an attachment area where you can have attachments, people sometimes put see story in attachment. Yeah. And just label it attachment 1 or attachment 2.
Mm-hmm. I've also thought of just emailing, any extra info to whoever's coordinating the grant.
You can do that. Yeah. And even, share your stories all along. If you receive a grant, share those stories via email or whatever method you can all along, so that those stories are consistently in front of the funder too. And they'll remember those stories even if they saw it a couple months ago before you submitted your grant request.
Right, right.
Your stories from your last one, perhaps. I am, and I should say, I'm happy to stay on. I see we're at 2:30, but if I'm happy to continue to answer questions, but I also understand if anybody needs to depart.
I'll say two things in case people do need to depart. Besides thank you, that's one, but our next program will be about nonprofit collaboration and how it can benefit both nonprofits or all those involved and the community. I will be sending an email with the slides on PDF, the recording of this, and an evaluation. So please fill that out. And like I said, watch for our next program. So thank you all for being here. And now you can ask Marian all the questions you want, and anybody who needs to leave can do so.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay on, but like I said, understand if anybody needs to leave. Anything else in the chat?
I don't think I have any more questions, so I'm going to sign off. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the collaboration webinar, so look forward to it.
That is already up on the should be up on the website, but it's definitely up on our Facebook page. And
Okay.
You can email me directly if you don't see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marian.
I do have my
And thanks,
contact.
Amy.
Yes.
And I want to mention I have my contact information up here because if anybody thinks of a question later, you're welcome to contact me. Are we? Sounds like we might be good. Anybody else?
Here we have a question. Okay. Do you have any experience with federal grants and the concept of starting a 501c3 in order to gain access to the funds?
Federal, I have less, to be honest, I have less experience with federal grants than I do with like pursuing grants from private foundations. What I do know is that federal grants are much, much more complex in terms of what you have to put together, much, much more strict in terms of what they will support and adherence to all kinds of regulations and guidelines when you receive a grant. Some of you on here may know much more about federal grants than I do. I am a part of a few right at the present that we're a partner in, but and probably they might be a little bit less interested in stories and more interested in facts and statistics too. Usually they have like scoring rubrics that, you know, you've got to score certain points in certain areas and you need to make sure you touch on all of those things in order to score the points. So I probably am not answering that. If anybody else on the call wants to pitch into that, you're welcome to.
This is Ayla. If you go to futureofnursingwv@gmail.com, I'm happy to answer those questions for you. We just put in a big federal grant.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Great.
Ayla.
Excellent.
Ayla, what was your
Thank you.
contact again?
Future of Nursing WV.
Futureofnursingwv.com.
Well, it's .org if you're going to the website.
Yeah, that's where I'm headed. Okay.
At gmail.com if you want to email me. And I'm happy to share anything I've learned about these. I never wrote a grant before, and I've gotten all of the grants I've ever written. This is my first federal grant. I've put into 2 federal agencies, the Regional Commission Power Grant and Economic Development Administration, and vetted them as all matches for that grant. And it is involved and it's doable. We haven't got it yet, but my hunch is it's probably, from everyone I've talked to, it's a pretty good proposal. They're going to like it.
Good. Best of luck to you.
Happy to share what I've learned anyway in the process.
You'll be hearing from me in a
Sure.
minute. Okay.
No problem.
I'm gonna text you and send the email off my laptop from my tablet while I'm on the computer. You know.
I'll help anybody who needs help. No problem.
Okay.
I'm glad you made that connection. I love that that still can happen even on Zoom, because a lot of times at workshops, some of the biggest benefits you get out is connecting with somebody else in the room who can help you. So I'm glad to see that connection made.
Well, and I'm going to contact you, Marion, because we do work in the Parkersburg area, so that'd be cool. We've gotten sisters grants before.
Great, excellent.
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Marion. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm sure everybody found it very helpful, because I've seen it a couple times and I still learn something every time. So thank you very much, Marion.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. You all have a good rest of the day.
Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.